And that leads us to our third speaker, Adrian Raine, Richard Perry University Professor of Criminology and Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania and author of Anatomy of Violence, The Biological Roots of Crime. Adrian does, among other things, scans of brain activity in criminals and other people. I think his is the first paper in neuroscience that I've ever read where it says control group non-murderers. So, Adrian, what has your research shown about the different areas of the brain that both impel us toward and inhibit us from violence?
Yes, the origins of violence. And here in my work and the work of other people, it's, we're not saying that, everyone, as you say, is propelled towards violence for a biological reason, but not all of us are violent. And so the question that I've been looking at is, what discriminates or what difference is there between somebody who will take a life and somebody who's relatively normal? So what you see here is the results of a brain imaging study where we brain scanned 41 murderers and compared them to 41 normal controls. So if you look at this, you're looking down on the brain here. Oh, don't want to look down on me too much. If you put it down, there we go. You're looking down on the brain here, and this is an example of a normal individual. This is the front of the brain, the back, and the red colors and yellow indicate high glucose metabolism or high brain functioning. But what we found in our group of 41 murderers is that there was a distinct lack of activity in the prefrontal cortex. So the question, yes, the origin, the cause, why is it that if you lack that activity in the prefrontal cortex, why do you have a poor functioning prefrontal cortex? Why are you more likely to kill? Well, you go back to what the prefrontal cortex does. And amongst other things, it's involved in checking our impulsive behavior. It's involved in regulating our emotional feelings. So we all get angry at times, don't we? What stops us from lashing out? It's that guardian angel on behavior that Stephen was mentioning. It's the prefrontal cortex, which is keeping a lid on our runaway emotions. But if that angel is asleep, if the prefrontal cortex is not working too well, then the devil can come out and people can get killed. Now, that's only one piece of a much bigger jigsaw puzzle when we get to the brain basis to violence. You've been hearing about the moral psychology, and there's a brain area called the amygdala, which generates, in part, that sense of moral feeling of what's right and wrong. And what we've been finding in a way is that psychopathic individuals, those who lack conscience, lack remorse, lack guilt, they have a shrunken amygdala. And we know that the amygdala is very important for giving us, in part, that sense of what is right and wrong. So one of those intriguing questions I have is, if these murderers and psychopaths are not responsible for poor brain functioning, whether it's in the emotional amygdala or the guardian angel in the prefrontal cortex here, then one question is, how moral is it of us to punish these offenders as harshly as we do? I was involved in a defense of a man who brutally raped and murdered a woman in Denver, Colorado. I had him brain scanned, and this is, again, you're looking down on the brain. This is a group of normal controls showing good activation in the prefrontal cortex. But this is the scan of the murderer here who raped and murdered this young woman, and you see a distinct lack of activation in the prefrontal cortex. I argued that it was a constellation of this neurobiological risk factor combined with a really dreadful home environment that conspired to propel this individual to be more likely to be criminal and violent. The three-judge panel bought the biosocial argument that this social and biological conspiracy constrained this individual's freedom of will, and he was spared the death penalty. But I think one of the big questions in my mind is that the right way to go? I'm sort of a Jekyll and Hyde. The Dr. Jekyll inside of me says, let's get to the origins of violence, let's understand it, and with understanding comes mercy. But the Mr. Hyde inside of me says, buy into that argument, and, where goes justice? Where goes responsibility? Is that just going to be a brain excuse to let violent offenders off the hook? Is that just a slippery slope down to Armageddon and a lawless society? So that's just one of those questions that I'm really torn with. And then what are we going to do about it? How are we going to change the brain to change violent criminal behavior? That's a deep question, but this is going to sound fishy, but fish oil given to prisoners in 2 randomized controlled trials has been shown to reduce serious offending in the prison by around 34%. Fish oil contains omega-3, which is critical for brain structure and function. So, nobody likes to hear, eat more fish for felons, come on. But it sounds laughable, and there's no simple solution to the causes of crime. But could that be one of the components? And what would be so wrong about giving better nutrition, not just to felons, but what about the next generation of young kids who maybe, through having social risk factors and biological risk factors, need early intervention and prevention against future crime? So, big questions, If there is a brain basis to violence, what does this mean about punishment? What does it mean to us about preventing? How are we going to change the brain to reduce violent behavior? And these are just 2 of the thorny questions which, amongst other things, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde inside of me wrestles with from day to day.